Welcome to this episode of Nordic Tales and American Trails. In this episode, it's gonna be me, and we're gonna be joined by one of our more dedicated listeners, Jeremiah, who's actually do something very interesting from my point of view, at least, and I also think from even American point of views. He's an active wounded game tracker in USA with his Norwegian Elkhound, where he tracks down both wounded deer and wounded moose, and also wounded black bears, where he helps with the wounded game recovery. He's also a very active trapper, so we're gonna talk a lot about everything from trapping to Norwegian Elkhound to wounded game tracking, but also when Jeremiah hunts black bears with his Norwegian Elkhound. Very much looking forward to this week's episode, and I hope you are as well. If you like the podcast, please like, share, subscribe, promote it to your friends, promote it in Facebook groups, and help us grow if you like it. Hopefully other people around you likes it as well. And then a bit of a season recap, okay? So we're now middle of December. We have 1.5 months left of moose and dog chase season here in Sweden. The season's been both good and bad, I think. We're gonna dive into that a little bit more later in another episode, but we've gotten a lot of mooses down. 2 for my oldest Russian European Laika, Lily. But it feels that our moose tend to run a bit more this season. Or, well, it's been the case for the last years, actually. It feels like it's an effect of the wolf population. So you do not really get that really strong baying. But at the same time, I also know that my older Laikas aren't really the best baying dogs around. So it's definitely going to be fun to see, because my West Siberian Laika, Sarah, has really developed well this season. So it's going to be amazing to see her next season. That's a quick bit of a rundown from middle of Sweden here, and let's jump on a call with Jeremiah, and I hope you have a good evening or morning wherever you're listening from, and let's go. Nordic Tales and American Trails is an outdoor and hunting podcast focusing on tales and trails from Northern Europe and the USA, hosted by Erik Rodin from Sweden and Adam Wu from Louisiana. The podcast covers all aspects of the outdoors, with a special emphasis of hunting with dogs. We will explore the unique tales and trails of our region, the various dog breeds used in hunting, and the differences in hunting practices between the USA and Northern Europe. So welcome to Nordic Tales and American Trails, Jeremiah.
Sounds good.
How are you doing tonight? Or afternoon for you, I think it is.
Yeah, it's just getting dark here. No, I'm doing just fine. Just got home from work, got soaked, so that was fun. But
I assume that's the season for you as well. Here you're even freezing your butt off, or you're soaking wet or cold.
yeah, I wish it was freezing, honestly. I don't like these warm-ups. They're not the most fun. Hard on the animals.
Oh yeah, for sure.
And it's definitely odd weather. We should be having much colder temperatures this time of year, but it doesn't seem to be the way it's progressing these days.
So, where are you actually located in the States?
So, do you know where New York is?
Yep.
So I am east and north of New York.
Okay, so then your weather is going to be a lot more similar to my weather than compared to
It
what
should be
Adam
very
has.
similar, yeah.
Yep.
And I live in the state, I live up in the mountains. So I'm right at not quite 1,900 feet in elevation for the house.
Okay.
So we're pretty up there. It's nice and cold.
Yeah.
It's supposed to be.
Yeah, I love correct me if you don't have it, but like I love the 4 seasons where you can
Yeah.
clearly say it's winter, it's spring, it's summer, it's autumn, and then it just now, as you said before as well, like this time of year, it feels like the seasons are getting more and more mixed. Winter isn't really arriving when it should be.
Yep. Well, and we keep having breaks in the winter where all of a sudden it's mud season for a week and then it goes back to being frozen.
Yeah, the mud and ice season is amazing in the winter time.
Yeah. We haven't had much ice for the last couple of years. It's actually been pretty horrible for like ice fishing and beaver trapping. It's not that great. We haven't been getting the cold temperatures we normally do. Normally we're well below -20 for Fahrenheit, and last 2 years, we haven't dipped much below zero.
Yeah, it's the same here. Like normally you would take a break here in hunting, maybe end of November, early December, before like rivers and lakes freezes,
Yep.
basically safety for the dogs if they're stupid enough to chase after something that's smaller than them, like a fox.
Yep.
But last years yeah, you just have to have someone close by so they can try to rescue the dog if they try to go over the thin ice.
Sure.
Before we get too deep into the conversation here, do a quick, the hardest question I think we ask anyone here, like do a quick introduction of who you are.
Yeah. Well, I'm Jeremiah Gracie. I'm born and raised in Vermont. I've been hunting since I was little, but it hasn't really been the most passionate thing for me because honestly, I'll be the first one to say it. I'm not a great hunter. My eyes are not the best, which is why I gear much towards trapping. I love trapping. Trapping's definitely my thing. It's a longer season here in Vermont. We get about 5 months where we can water trap. And that's really been my main passion until I started getting into dogs. And yeah, the dogs have really kind of changed how things have gone for me. I mean, best example is this year. I've had our busiest year working with the dog, and I haven't even set a trap yet, even though it's been trapping season for a little over a month and a half. So now that we're winding down with some of our tracking and the dog work, I'm looking forward to getting into some trapping for this coming weekend.
Amazing, amazing. So when you grew up hunting in your state, what what's the normal game to grow up hunting? Are we talking whitetail or?
Definitely whitetail, and when I was little, my dad had beagle dogs, so we went after rabbits a lot. We messed around a little bit with Labrador retrievers and duck hunting, but it's mostly deer hunting. Yeah, whitetails. The occasional bear when they walk by, but
So,
definitely whitetails is the biggest thing. If you're a hunter in Vermont, you more than likely hunt whitetails.
and I assume you can't use dogs for deer hunting?
You cannot. No, no dogs involved at all, except for what I do, which is the tracking part of things.
Yeah, we're gonna definitely have to dive into because you actually do tracking with a Norwegian Elkhound, which is how we connected.
Yep.
But yeah, I'm quickly gonna start us with the trapping because that really is something that
Yeah.
not many people do here in Sweden at all. I know it's a bigger thing in the States, but correct me, I don't think that many people do it these days. It was like when I'm thinking about trapping, I'm thinking like mountain men, 1800s,
Yeah. Oh,
beaver,
yeah.
and like the Wild West and the whole story around that. So, how did you get into trapping, and what game did you actually start trapping?
Well, trapping was one of those things where I guess when I was younger, I kind of had it in my mind that I wanted to go and see Alaska and possibly move up there one day. And I figured if I was going to have any chance of doing that, I ought to learn a few skills, and trapping was one of them. So I have a neighbor who lives down the road. He's an older gentleman, and he was a pretty big trapper. And I got to talking to him one afternoon and asked him if he'd show me a few things. And I tagged along with him for a year on his trap line, and after doing that for one season, I ended up deciding that I really wanted to get into it more, so I started beaver trapping. That was the first animal I really went at. Um, he gave me the best piece of advice I've had so far, actually. He told me that if you want to get into trapping, considering how there's so many different types of animals you can trap, he says rather than going full bore into it and throwing yourself in 20 different directions, getting a bunch of different traps. He said, pick one animal that really interests you, learn as much as you can about it. And when you start setting your traps, you'll make a set and he says, you'll stand back looking at your set and you'll be hoping you get something. He says, then you'll go along and you'll catch a few things, but then at some point, you're going to make a set, stand up, look at it, and you're going to know you're going to catch something. He says, when you get to that point, then you can choose another animal. And that's kind of what I did. I started with beaver, and I spent 2 or 3 years really just figuring out beaver. And that really started getting my mind into like trapping mode, which is a lot different than hunting. It's more about wh- it's more about how things move, where they move, but at the same time, you don't have to be there. You just have to anticipate that and set things right, and the traps can work for you 24 hours a day, which is an amazing thing. And I had a good bit of success with it, and then started growing from there. Then I started. Next animal I went to was river otter. I caught one in a beaver trap. Incidentally, I wasn't trying to. I just made a good beaver set and happened to catch an otter in it. And after I pulled that first otter out of the water, it was just absolutely amazing. That was a really incredible creature. Their otters still mystify me, and I've caught quite a few of them. But what I would say is beavers are definitely, I mean, they're rats for sure. They're not the smartest things in the world. You might end up with one beaver that's, a little trap smart. Maybe he's had something not set right and snapped in his face, and they'll avoid some steel or they'll avoid something that looks square. But for the most part, beaver are pretty easy as far as trapping goes. You don't have to do too much thinking to really figure them out. Whereas with otter requires a lot. It's more like hunting, I think. I mean, that is one smart creature in my opinion. And it takes a lot of effort because when you're coming up to a zone where you might have a good set for an otter, it's not like beaver. Beaver are living right there in their pond system, and that's where they are. Whereas otter, they have huge roots and they're completely nomadic. So what might be a good spot for otter would be an excellent spot to set a trap, but there might not be an otter in that spot for a month, 2 months. You don't know. It's all about how they're making their circuits and what they're finding for food. So it's definitely more of a patience game for sure. And that's kind of something I appreciate with it. It's not as easy and it's just a more enjoyable thing. So
Yeah.
I got into doing that. And then, yeah, it's really kind of from there, I've really just branched out a little bit into catching muskrats and some mink and more incidentals, more just things I catch while I'm catching beavers and otters type deal. And other than that, I haven't really got into the land trapping much. I like the water trapping. Water trapping's definitely a lot easier for me. There's something about being in swamps. I just like it. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So when you so here in Sweden, I do actually hunt a fair bit of beaver,
Yep.
but with a rifle and a canoe, and you basically float. I think the English term would be like floating down a river or like a
Yep.
river or a creek.
Absolutely.
Uh, because I feel that the beaver is a lot less sensitive to smell and sound from water because they have no natural predators, at least here from the water side. While if you're sitting on the ground, they're a lot more alert,
Yeah.
and they're surprisingly quick if they spot you.
Oh, they definitely are.
Uh,
They know what's going. When they're in the water, they're agile little things, but when they get out, they're quite awkward.
yeah, yeah, for sure. I've actually had some of my dogs actually manage to bay a beaver or once or twice actually when they run around like run alongside the water.
Yep.
Uh, But so do you actually when you try to trap beaver because that's something I've been debating of trying out here because here you would have to go to like a take an extra exam to actually be allowed to trap beavers because here our otters are strictly protected. So like a lot of the education is to how do you set a beaver trap with zero chance to catching an otter.
Yep.
Uh, but do you set the trap at like a food plot or like where you think their den is or just on like pathways in between?
So the biggest thing for me when it comes to beaver is I live in a pretty rural part of the state and I don't like to drive too much for beaver. So I actually trap specific animals within a within the zone that they're in. Like for me, I'm when I come up to a pond, I don't want to trap every single beaver in that pond because if I trap every single beaver, then next year there's not going to be any beavers in that pond and I'm going to have to drive even further away from my house in order to actually find something to trap. So I've learned to just try and be selective and try and take a few, but also try and take the larger animals. Beaver are interesting in the fact that they have very strict social structures. The males and the females will do have very specific jobs. Like the males they're dam builders. That's their number one job is they are maintaining the dam, building the dam, and they are the main labor force, as it were. Whereas the females are going to be taking care of the kits, but also they're the food gatherers. And so when you come out, so I mean, sure you've seen it with beavers. Sometimes you'll have like one nice pond with a hut on it, but then there's a bunch of secondary ponds that are further out from the a main pond. And so when I see that, I very rarely actually set traps in the main pond because when you're in the main pond, you have a high chance of catching the kits, the little ones. Because their main job is just all they do pretty much is go down to the bottom and they come up with big armfuls of mud and they pile mud on top of the hut. That's their job for their first year of life while they're living with their parents. So if you can avoid the main ponds, which I try to do, go out on those secondary and tertiary ponds. And if you could set on the perimeters, like around the actual dams or whatnot, like then that's how I can try and catch just, like maybe the dominant male or the dominant female out of a group. And then I back off. Once I have one or two beavers for a pond, then I pull my traps, go someplace else and leave all the little ones. And then the other thing that's also nice for that is by doing it during the season, if you can take out the larger, or at least one or two of the larger beavers from the group, they've already put up enough food for all of them. So now those little ones are going to have a surplus of food and they're actually going to have a better chance of making it through the winter. Because what a lot of people don't realize is, especially with Vermont's been having crazy floods for the last couple of years during the summers. And sometimes beaver have to start over really late as far as putting up their food supplies, and sometimes they don't quite get enough up. And if that pond freezes for too long and they run out of food, they're all going to starve. So generally speaking, I think it's a good practice to go around, especially to some of the larger ponds that might be containing, 6+ beaver, maybe even upwards of a dozen beaver, and try and take out a couple of the larger ones. Because at that point in the year, that's just gonna save on their food consumption. And that way, in a way, you're essentially managing the beaver population in a way that's both good for the beaver, but also good for the trapper in the sense that you're not wiping them all out and having to drive further and further every single year in order to get beaver.
Yeah. So, do you sell the fur, or is the beaver fur trading still a thing, or do you just?
It's yeah, it's definitely still a thing. There's a market for it. The main market is actually Stetson hats, cowboy hats. They're all made out of beaver felt. But it's a pretty low paying market. Ever since I really got into trapping, there hasn't been any money in fur. And I've actually never sold any. I've kept every piece of fur I've ever caught. I usually send it off, get it tanned, and then use it to make certain things. Like we're working on trying to get to a big beaver blanket, which is kind of difficult because the usable fur for off a beaver comes off in a diamond shape, and you kind of got to get like size pieces of diamonds in order to actually sew them all together. So I'm saving and saving, trying to get enough of a singular size of beaver to make a blanket. Other than that, we make gloves and hats and use them around the house. Usually have a bunch on the back of the couch or on the bed, and they're great. I mean, the way
Yeah.
I see it, if I'm not gonna make money do it, I might as well save them because I like it. It's something I enjoy using and doing, and really the money's not the main driving factor for me. It's being out there, and the main reason at this point for trapping is actually for dog meat. We feed the dogs a lot of beaver. They love it.
Yeah. So we actually just got uh what do you call it? Like a emergency notice from our fishing game here, because apparently Canadian beaver is blooming in Finland, and they're afraid that they're gonna cross over to Sweden as well. So they asked us hunters to be actively looking out for Canadian beavers, because apparently Canadian beaver and European beaver are two different subspecies.
I did not know that,
No,
honestly.
I didn't know that either, actually. And apparently your beavers, or the Canadian beaver, I'm gonna assume the Canadian beaver and American beavers are the same subspecies.
I would assume as well.
I think so. So how big is a big beaver for you? Because apparently ours beavers are supposed to be smaller.
Well, I would say a big beaver is 70 pounds for
Oh
a
yeah.
you know, a
Okay.
whopper. I think the
Yeah.
biggest I've ever caught was 72 pounds. I would say an average, like, good sized beaver is somewhere between 45 and 60 pounds.
Yeah.
And I get a lot more like 50 pounders than I do the 70s. The 70s are pretty like I've caught probably over 150 beaver at this point, and I think I've caught three that were in the 70-pound range.
Yeah.
But
Okay. Yeah. So
yeah,
that then it's clearly that you have the Canadian beavers as well, because I think our country record is like 56, 57 pounds.
yep, yeah,
Uh,
that would be a good sized beaver still, but that's pretty common over here.
yeah, I would say like anything above 50 pound here, which would be for our Swedish listeners like 22 kilos. That's like a monster beaver here.
Yeah. No, I've definitely heard of some from further south in the US, like around Ohio and Illinois, where some guys are catching 100-pound beaver.
Oof.
Like monsters, like living in essentially the bigger the water, the bigger they get.
Yeah, yeah,
And so like some of those guys got monster rivers and they're just pulling out these hogs of better beaver.
yeah. I
And
mean, and
I
a
saw one
hundred,
picture that was crazy.
yeah, 100-pound beaver. That's like a fucking tank.
It's like a deer. Yeah,
Yeah.
for
So
sure.
so beaver, you started with beaver and then you moved on to otters.
Yep.
So obviously from me, I've never hunted otters. I've only like we have only a few of them, so like there's not a target species at all here, and they're protected. They feel very, very smart. Like, how much more work is it to trap an otter than a beaver?
Well, it depends on the otter. The biggest thing is that otters are a lot more aware what's going on around them, and I think the reason for that is when they're moving, they're constantly hunting. So they're looking at everything. I mean, they are apex predators in their world. You know, like there's over here there is nothing that kills an otter except for humans. Like other than possibly other otter, like males fighting. Other than that, like their whole world is just hunting. And so, in my opinion, if you have an animal that is that alert, they're that much more aware of what's going around them. I guess the craziest one I've ever had, or like the most difficult time, is like I had an otter that I feel he must have been either caught in a trap or seen another otter caught in a trap, and he knew what they were. And I had seen this really sizable slide in the snow. He was coming off this mountain and it was a single track. So normally around here they move in groups. And but when you see a singular otter, 90% of the time it's a male just moving around by himself. And I saw this one monster slide coming off the mountain in the snow and going into this pond. So I decided to set on it. And it took about a month until I started to see sign again. I saw that same slide coming down the same spot, and that otter came up to my trap. He got within 2 feet of it, and then he went around it in a circle, left the path, and then he slipped into the pond in another spot. So I decided that needed to do something else. So I moved my trap further into a pond around kind of a narrow little outlet where the brook was coming into it, where I knew he was coming out. And I waited another month for I was going there all the time to catch other things, but I was looking for this one particular track. And about a month later, I saw that track again coming down off the mountain, sliding through the snow. And this time he went down into that pond, and then about 6 feet before my trap in the water, he got out of the water, ran along the bank, probably about 20 feet past the trap, then slipped back in. And that kind of like that's when I first realized, oh, like he's visually seeing my trap. He knows what it is and he's avoiding it. So I decided to try moving the trap further up into a tighter brook where a little pinch point. And I waited about another month. And once again, he did the same thing. He got to right within that trap about 10 feet before it. Then he hopped out of the brook, ran through the snow on the side of the bank, and then he slipped back in the brook about 10 feet past that trap. So that's when I was really raking my brain for what to do. So I figured at this point he was kind of wise to what I was doing. So I left that trap right there exactly the way he did it. I had it. And then about 40 feet up the brook, on a really hard, tight little switchback, I set a second trap. And waited another month, and this is getting to the very end of the season, and that he came back down off the mountain, slid into that same pond. That first trap, he got out of the water and did the exact same thing, avoided it, and then he must have thought he had my number, and then he went up the brook a little bit further and took that hard corner, and that trap was wrapped up right around his head, and that was it for him. But that was about 4 months of me waiting and me being
Yep.
patient and me trying to think about how to catch this one otter, and I finally did it, and that's when I really realized just how smart these things were. It takes a lot of work, and it takes a lot of just thinking about how they're moving and what it is they're doing when they're there. Because I think the biggest difference between them and beaver is beaver are in very like they move in the same spots every single day. They may have a big pond, but they're only using 10% of it. Like they take the same, like, they come out of their hut, they go to have their one path to their food pile, and then the males will have a path running around the border where they're checking out the dam, and they move in those same spots every single day. Whereas an otter, they're not doing that. They're moving everywhere they can because they're looking for every crawfish, every frog, every little fish they can. They're trying to hunt. So it's a much more erratic animal in order to catch. Like it's a lot more. You have to think about what they're going to do, and you have to try and figure out how best you can trick them, I guess is, but it's definitely much more of a challenge.
Yeah, and I think it comes with like the territories you were in. Like when you're a predator, you're a lot more alert.
Yes.
Not only for danger, but for like opportunities. So uh, I think it's the same here. Like here we can trap badgers and foxes, which would be like the most common animals to try to trap, and marten.
Hmm.
But like once you actually failed to trap a fox, that fox is probably never gonna try to step close to a trap again.
Yeah, they learn fast.
Yeah. So that's amazing to actually hear that the otters are very similar in that sense. So how happy were you when you actually managed to outsmart that one?
I was pretty stoked, and that is to this day the biggest otter I've ever caught. He had a wide head on him. He was kind of a short, stubby tail, but you can tell I think he'd been bit off in a fight or something like that. He only had one eye. He was missing part of a lip. He was just an old warrior of an otter.
Yeah.
It was a pretty good feeling to walk along that, then all of a sudden just see him all wrapped up in that trap and finally have him after that long, and then finally actually get to see him too. Because until that point, I never even laid eyes on him. Because it's not like you ever really see otter very often. I've seen a handful of them during the day, but I mean, they spend more than 80% of their life in the water, and if you're not sitting there really looking, like you could very easily miss them. Honestly, I've run into a lot of people that when I tell them that I trap otter in Vermont, they're like, "Oh, I didn't know we even had otter in Vermont." Well, it's one of those things you gotta pay attention to, and we actually have quite a few. We have a lot of otter here, but they're not in a very, I guess, see like, you just don't see them. Like, they're
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
or when you do, it feels rare and special, but it's just because you're not in those spots where they are. Not many people are hanging out in some
Yeah.
backwoods swamp and just waiting on those crossover spots to see what they see, like, not many people are actually sitting there in the rivers and paying attention to what's swimming around the banks or under the cut banks or and because of that, they're kind of a little bit more, I guess, people just don't realize that they're there, I guess is the biggest thing.
Yep. Yeah, that's amazing. So would you say is if you ask a random person on the street where you live, are they for or against trapping? And are they more happy that you trap beavers or that like because here like a cute animal like we tried to actually get to be able to legally hunt squirrels again. It's been
Yeah.
banned for 20 years or something like no one would I don't think many people would actually start hunting them again. But like just because they're cute and fluffy
Oh
uh,
yeah.
there
Well,
it's a more like but if I tell someone I actually had this weekend I was out training my youngest dog uh, and I ran into an older couple walking with their grandkids and they were like, "Oh, you're out walking the dog? Yeah, I'm gonna see if I can find some wild boars." And then we're like, "Yeah, yeah, yeah. They destroyed our potatoes this
Yeah.
summer." But if I would tell them like, "Oh, I'm here to try to hunt moose or fox or anything like that," then I'm not gonna say they're gonna be against it. But like, if I tell someone I'm hunting wild boars, everyone's gonna be happy. Is it the
Yeah.
same with like beavers compared to otters?
Well, it depends. So Vermont's a pretty diverse political landscape. I mean, we're a pretty rural state, but we have a few like cities that are large in population. And so we have a huge dichotomy between people that love trapping and people that absolutely hate trapping and want to end every bit of it.
Yeah,
We have a huge anti-hunting movement in Vermont, where it's all the city people that are moving here from all over the country because they feel Vermont's beautiful and quaint and they want to retire here. But first thing they do is they bring their politics with them. Um, so there's a huge push, especially in our legislature, to try and get. I mean, it's been happening for years now. They've been trying to outlaw trapping outright. Um, just because they hate it. They don't want to see animals in traps, but at the same time, they also leave all kinds of opportunity for nuisance trapping because as soon as it starts affecting people's property, then they don't seem to care. So in that sense, you definitely get a lot more acceptance of beaver trapping because a lot of people we have tons of beaver in Vermont. They're everywhere because we have a lot of water here. So there's a lot of people out there that get issues with them flooding their driveway or flooding their lawn or getting into their pond and cutting all their trees around their pond that they spent decades planting or so there's definitely a part of the population that understands, but then there's also another part of the population that wants to see every beaver, living in a little with
tail.
their family and their grandparents and everything like that, and they think it's something out of Redwall or some sort of,
Yep,
think that they're personifying the animals for sure,
yep.
and
This
they
is
just don't understand the natural cycles they go through. Because I always try to tell people when I run into people that hate trapping, I'm like, well, if I don't trap, do you understand what happens to these animals if you don't trap them? Beavers, they build up a pond and essentially they will eat every tree that they can get to within the water's edge. And at a certain point, one of two things are going to happen. Either they're going to run out of food to eat and they're all going to starve over the course of a winter, or they're going to be going so far further and further away from the water in order to get food that they're going to get eaten by coyotes or owls or eagles or something. And
yep,
there's always colony collapse.
yep,
If you left a beaver colony alone for 20 years, it will eventually turn into absolutely nothing. And every one of those beaver will die at some point because either a flood's going to come through and knock the dam out and it's going to wash away all the water and get rid of all their protection. And the coyotes are just going to come in and eat them all. Or the same thing, dam could wash out and then they relocate, but they don't have enough time to put up enough food before the ice really sets and they can't leave the pond anymore. Then they just simply starve under the ice because they
yep,
don't have enough food put up for the entire winter. And so, in my mind, if you had people actually going out and managing the populations and taking a few beaver here and there and cleaning them up, it saves a lot of suffering. And a lot of people don't get that because they don't understand the biology and they don't understand what it means to be a beaver and what a beaver's life is. It's hard because honestly, everything in the woods eats beaver. If you eat meat, you eat beaver if you can. So
yep,
they are at the bottom of the food chain. And I don't know. In my mind, I feel like if I were a beaver, I'd rather die quick and sudden in a snap trap than I would be ripped apart by three hungry coyotes or have an eagle come down and grab me in the back and drag you off just enough to realize that it can't take your weight. Then it drops you and you free fall for 30 feet and then they just pick your bones clean. Like,
yep,
it's or starving under the ice. Like, I mean, I could imagine how much that would suck. You literally can't get out, can't do nothing about anything because you're frozen in that pond. And if you eat all the food, you ate all the food. That's it.
yep.
There's no
Yeah,
grocery store to go to.
and I mean, nature is a fucking harsh place. The
Oh,
pro
it's brutal.
The only
Pretty,
thing is we managed to like distance ourselves so far. If
mm,
especially if you're not into nature or hunting or fishing or trapping in any shape or form, like you're so far away from the harshness of nature that yeah, it feels like people think if we just leave everything alone, it's gonna be like a beautiful meadow with flowers and everyone dancing with each other and singing songs like in a Disney movie.
yeah.
Uh, but yeah, so thank you a lot for talking about trapping. We're gonna move on to what we actually think. Or I thought you were doing more, but then a few days ago, you told me you were trapping a lot as well.
Yeah.
So, you actually do would the term be wounded game tracking or recovery, or what term would actually be the
Yeah.
term you use?
I say most common people call it uh, blood tracking. I call it wounded big game recovery because blood tracking is definitely a misnomer. We don't track blood at all, actually. We track adrenaline. But yeah, so what I do with that is I got my dog, and he's trained to locate animals that have been hit by other hunters. And depending upon the circumstances or the situation, like we can either track it down and recover it if it's dead, or we can track it down and show the hunter where it went. And if the season's still open and it's still legal, they can pursue it from that point, or we can judge whether or not an animal that has been hit is in a perfectly capable way of surviving that hit. And then, it gives peace of mind to hunters. So I started doing that 5 years ago, with my Norwegian Elkhound trapper. He's pretty damn good at it, honestly. I got him into the class when he was 10 months old and graduated from the class, and he found his first deer about a week after turning 1. So he's been rock star ever since, actually. We've been having a lot of fun with it. The hardest part's been actually getting our names out so we get enough calls for him to really practice. First couple of years was a little slow, but every year it picks up more and more. We get our name out there more and more people call. We just actually on Sunday finished all of deer season for Vermont, and we had our best year yet. We took 76 tracks and found 25 animals, which was pretty incredible for us. Um, yeah, it's been the year with a lot of firsts in it. First time we've found more than 16 animals. First time we found moose. Um, and just some of the nose work he's been doing has been absolutely incredible. First time we found an animal over a mile and a half away, and that was a moose that we found, and we found that thing 3.5 miles after the hit site. Pretty incredible.
Yeah. So we talked about this in previous episodes. Like here, you have to have a wounded game dog on site within 2 hours.
Yep.
No matter if you're hunting roe deer or moose, or even if you're hunting birds, you are by law required to have a bird dog that you can send out to catch any wounded birds and bring them back to you.
Yep.
So for the Swedish listeners, like doing wounded game searching is like how we grew up. Like it's like if not 50% of the hunt, it's like obviously no hunter ever want a wounded game. No matter, I think, if you're in Sweden or in the States. But like, if you hunt enough, it's gonna happen. But in the States, there's a lot of states that you can't even use a dog to blood track or
Mhm.
wounded game track. Uh, but you can do that in Vermont, I assume, as you're doing it.
Yes.
uh, but you can't remove the leash, right? You
Nope.
can't let trapper go.
We're an on-leash state. And I think a big part of that is just the politics here. And I think a lot of that stems from bear hunting with dogs, because a lot of the main conflicts that we have is just the fact that, hunting hounds don't pay attention when they see posted signs or property changes, like they're going to chase they're gonna chase the game that they're on, and the game doesn't give a shit where the hell it is. So it's gonna run. You know what I mean? So, and then you get all these people that are moving in from the different parts of the country, and they get their little tiny piece of land, and they all of a sudden see dogs chasing something, and they think it's the most horrible thing in the world. And so, a big part of the leash dog tracking is showing that we got control of the animal, and that kind of stuff won't happen. For instance, like when we're blood trailing at, say, a deer, and we come up to posted signs that says no hunting, no trespassing, we have to stop, and we cannot continue unless we can get permission from that landowner. And if they say no, we have to stop. Like, it's kind of unfortunate as far as the animal goes, because you never quite know. And I would say that the vast majority of people don't want animals to suffer, but some people just don't want to give any kind of hunter that any chance at all. They
Yeah,
think it's completely unfair, and they want nothing to do with it, and they're not going to say yes or help in any way, which is really unfortunate. But yeah, Vermont is an on leash tracking state only.
yeah. So to move back to this side of the pond, so to say, like, so if we're hunting a property here, and then we have a wounded moose, for example, that goes over the property line, then we are obligated to try to reach out to the hunting team that hunts that area. If we
Mhm.
can't get a hold of them, 90% of the time you know who's hunting next to you. So you most of the time have a pre-established relationship, and you might before the season, if decide like if we have a wounded moose that goes into your property and we can't get a hold of you, we're gonna is it okay for you that we proceed? And 95% of the time you're gonna have that like pre-approved that yes, go off, because here everything is related to we never wanna put any animal to like unnecessary suffering. And that's how our ethical hunting laws is actually written. Like we should never put an animal unnecessary suffering. Why we can't hunt roe deer with my Leicas, because a Leica is too fast, so the roe deer will basically have to run for their lives. Instead, we use a dash hound, and then you can see the roe deer strutting 150 yards in front, and the dogs is never gonna catch up to the roe deer. But if we can't get a hold of the landowner or the hunter that has the permit, we can just call the police, and they just gonna instantly say, "Yeah, keep chasing." Uh, So even if you have a property that's like against hunting here, like might not even have a hunting team on it, or no one has the hunting permit, it you will still be able to chase after the wounded game by calling the police, and they're gonna like overwrite not like the permit of the land, but like
Yeah.
the the ending the suffering of the animal is more important than not hunting on the property.
I would fully agree with you, but that's not the way the law is in Vermont.
No,
Property owner rights supersede everything. And in
yep,
fact, you could even tell the cops they're not allowed on your land.
yep,
So cops, game wardens, they cannot override posters at all. If someone says no, you can't do it.
yep,
It's very unfortunate because you would think that most people would want animals recovered, but it's seen more as, if you allow that to happen, it's seen as support for hunting. And
yep,
some people here, I think, are just so afraid of being seen as supportive that they
yep,
will do everything they can to distance themselves from it.
yep.
And it's an unfortunate thing because it's what it boils down to is people reacting based upon their emotions rather than actually understanding with the situation and what's going on.
Yeah, 100%. So how come you ended up with Trapper, and that he's a Norwegian Elkhound? Because Norwegian Elkhound is probably almost as rare in the States as the West Siberian Lycas that Adam uses.
Yeah. No, they're quite rare. I don't know. So I ended up getting him because of my brother. My brother quite randomly got a Norwegian Elkhound 8, 9 years ago. And she was this little runt of a pup. She actually doesn't even really look like a Norwegian Elkhound. I think she has some black mixed in there because she was very dark. She doesn't have the typical gray markings to her. Um, and she is an incredible dog. So my brother, he's a really big deer hunter. He goes as soon as deer season starts opening up, he hunts in several states all over the place and he does it all the time. So he'll hunt in Vermont, then he'll go to New Hampshire, then he'll go to or Massachusetts and New York. He usually does Wisconsin and New Jersey, and sometimes he goes to Arkansas. He does a lot. And so ever since he had her, he's always left her with me when he starts hunting because he usually hunts for 3, 4 months and he's just so all over the country doing that stuff that he's, just felt better about leaving her with me and having her have a safe space type deal. And so because of that, I started taking her with me when I was trapping because I enjoyed it. It was a fun thing. Um, and she was the first, I'd say, dog I had an experience with where I was like, wow, this thing is smart. Not only is she intelligent, but she's competent. You don't have to watch her 24/7. She follows along. She's, picks up on what we're doing really easy. And I'd say one of the first things where I was like, whoa, this is crazy was the second year I trapped with her. So I trapped with her one winter and she loved the fact that I was pulling beavers out of the river and all, like she all about it, loved eating them. And then we went through a summer where she was back with my brother. And then hunting season came again. And I remember taking her out for that second year and I was going to set traps. I didn't have anything set at all, but I was going to do it. And I had a couple spots that set traps every single year. And I remember opening the door to the truck and she jumped out, realized where we were, and she ran to where I had traps set last year. And I was like, holy shit, this dog like remembers. She has a memory of all this stuff. And like she's like, and this is a property that we'd only been to two, maybe three times. And she had such a positive association with trapping and getting a beaver that she knew where to go. And she, even though I had no traps there, she ran right over to the brook where my last trap was and stared in the water like, come on, pull one out. And she just really impressed me. Like she was, I mean, I grew up with dogs. I grew up with a lot of dogs. Come from a big family, and we always all had our own dogs, and we had labs and beagles and German shepherds and all kinds of things. But they were dogs. Like they were, if you put in enough work, you could get a smart one here and there. But she just blew them out of the water as far as impressing me for what a dog could do.
Yep.
And so after a couple years, I decided that I wanted a dog of my own, and I started looking into getting an Elkhound because I loved that one little dog so much. And so I decided I wanted my own, and that's how I ended up with Trapper. Um, I got him initially just for keeping me company on the trap line because it's like I said, it's a 5 month long season, and I don't have anybody that I trap with because there's really not many trappers I know who are my age and willing to get out there and do it. So I was spending a lot of time alone in the woods. And there's just something about having a dog with you that changes that. Like suddenly alone in the woods isn't really alone in the woods if you got a good dog.
No.
So I decided to get an Elkhound and I got Trapper. And I've really never looked back since. Spent the first year with him. I got him beginning part of November in maybe 2019 that I got him. And the first year I mean, first day, just got him home and took him trapping. Just went out and checked traps. And he was just this little tiny fluff ball. And I just shoved him in my coat and
Yep.
he'd fall asleep for 90% of it. But then he'd wake up and start tagging along, trying to jump from boot hole to boot hole in the snow. And that's kind of how we started off. I'm also fortunate because I work in the woods, and because of that, like that whole first year, I got to like, he just tagged along with me and he learned how to be a woods dog and how to behave on a trap line, as it were.
Yep.
And by the end of that first winter, he was about 6 months old, and I realized that I had a dog that could do more,
Yep.
essentially.
Yep.
He's smart, he needed a job, he needed something to do. And so I got online and looked around on our Fish and Wildlife website, and I found two permits for using dogs. One was the leash dog tracking, and the other was bear hound hunting. So I got the bear hound permit, and then I took the leash dog tracking class, which is there's a whole class you have to take for that. And like I said, he passed it quite quite easily, actually. And we started a little bit tracking that year, and we tried a lot of bear hunting.
Yep.
Um, and it's just kind of been a snowball effect since then, honestly.
Yeah.
I mean, the more I do it, the more that's all I want to do.
So yeah, you have just finished listening to part 1 of our conversation with Jeremiah, which we decided to split up into 2 parts. So this was episode part 1 with Jeremiah, where we're focusing on trapping, and we're just about to dive into Jeremiah and trappers, his Norwegian Elkhound's journey into wounded game recovery. We hope you enjoyed this week's episode. Share it with family and friends. And for next week, we're going to talk with Jeremiah again, and that's going to be more about wounded game recovery. We wish you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year's Eve. From Nordic Tales and American Trails, like and share the podcast with family and friends. And have some happy holidays.